You only live once, so you better get up. Don't never give up, and be strong. Like a tiger.
Be here with Jane Elliott. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to meet her. And I'm very happy that the students initiated this series on social justice. So that question regarding a comment I probably made during the period when people were talking about a post-racial America. Do you remember that?
Last week.
It wasn't that long ago. And I was probably responding to those who were arguing that racism was something of the past, that with the so-called triumph of the civil rights movement, we had overcome racism. It may have been during the time Obama was in office, because there was the assumption that the election of one black man to the White House magically eradicated, all of the consequences of racism and settler colonialism for the last 500 years.
I want you folks to do something. I want every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the white race to stand. Right now. Right now. Every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the white race. Now, remain standing. Now, remain standing. Now, will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the black race please stand? Up, 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 up. And remain standing. Now, the brown race. Anybody who considers himself or herself a member of the brown race. Now, the yellow race. Now, the red race. Now, look around you, people. Practically everybody's standing. Now, will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the human race please sit down? Now, people, you are all members of the same race, the human race, which started with black women between 300,000. Don't interrupt me, I don't have much time. Now, white folks, you don't like it, but all you are is faded blacks. That's the way it is. Every one of you, if you trace your DNA back far enough, you're going to find that some of your DNA came from Africa. Because we all have the same ancestor back there, every single one of us. And those of you who think you don't have are obviously from outer space. Now, that means that every one of us is a 30th to 50th cousin to every other person in this room.
Well, I totally agree with Jane.
Okay.
How can I not?
Accept that.
as someone who has spent many years teaching university students, teaching graduate students, I've learned that it makes no sense for me to simply tell my students what it is I think they ought to know. They might learn enough to write a good paper, and then they'll move on, moving in another direction. So I've come to the conclusion that teaching really is about helping people to ask the right questions. To ask the right questions, and to be able to come to the conclusion themselves that there is something really terribly wrong with the way racism has shaped the history of this planet.
How can we talk about race and privilege with openness and inclusiveness in a way that prevents people from shutting down?
People can shut down. People can shut down or not. That's up to them.
Okay.
Let me tell you something. I am not responsible for how you respond to me. You got it? I flat out don't care. If you learn something in here this evening from this woman who has forgotten more than I'll ever know about racism, and what little I know, if you decide to learn something in here tonight, you'll learn something. If you decide to be mad, you'll be mad. Go ahead. I don't care. That's your problem, not mine. I'm not responsible for how you feel. I am responsible for what I say. I'm responsible for what I do. You're responsible for your response to it. Be responsible for your response. It's time to face the truth and say the truth, and it's time for women, and all people of color to stop playing defense and defending what they are and go on the offense. We were here first. We don't have to apologize for what we are or for what we do. Now, I know some of you are thinking, boy, is she a bitch? Yes, I am. Now, how many of you women have been called the B word? Look around. How many of you are called that by a male? All right, people, for me, the B word is an acronym for being in total control, honey.
Important to emphasize the notion of privilege, but privilege, as Jane pointed out, can't explain the workings of racism altogether.
That's right.
Okay, so make that distinction. That's really important.
Well, do you want me to tell you when I first
Yes,
became
do that.
aware
Yes,
of
yes.
racism?
Yes, yes.
I had I don't know whether I would say good fortune or bad fortune, of growing up in the most segregated city in the United States of America during the 1940s and the 1950s, Birmingham, Alabama. And so I can't really tell you when I became aware of racism. I think that as I learned to think and learned to conceptualize, racism was always in the forefront. I can tell you that I remember when I was about 2 years old, because I was going to wear them to Sunday school the next day. It was a Saturday evening. And then suddenly, I heard this sound, this thunderous sound. As it turned out, the house across the street was being bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. Because I lived in an area of Birmingham that was right on the edge of the zone that had been created for black people. So we were able to live on one side of the street, white people on the other side of the street. When black people bought a house on the other side of the street, it was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. But let me say something parenthetically here, because you might ask, well, how is it that black people were able to buy a house in the white neighborhood? Because of course white people would have to sell it to them. It was because white people bought the house. White people who were involved in the anti-racist movement bought the house so that black people could challenge the racial zoning laws. This was in Birmingham, Alabama. You might have heard of Ann Brady from Louisville, Kentucky, who was one of my mentors. I met her when I was very, very young. And she and her husband, Carl, ended up doing the same thing in Louisville. They bought a house for a black couple. Carl ended up going to the federal penitentiary as a result, because he was charged with some incredible charge. But the point that I want to make is that, yeah, when I learned how to think, I learned how to think about racism. And I was very fortunate to be raised by...
How long do you think it's been going on? Forever? You're wrong. 500 years.
Yeah.
During the Spanish Inquisition, the people who were running the Spanish Inquisition and killing people because of their religion found out that they killed a whole lot of people who had the right religion. They couldn't tell what their religion is by looking at them. So they decided they had to find another way to identify the people that they were going to kill and enslave, or enslave. So they set upon skin color. People, it's only 500 years old. Now think of that. It's only 500 years old. Nobody was born a racist. There is no gene for bigotry. You were not born a racist. You have to be taught to be a racist, and you have to be carefully taught. And if you haven't seen that musical, in which the last song is, you have to be taught to be afraid of people whose skin is a different shade, of people whose eyes are differently made. You have to be carefully taught.
South Pacific.
Yes, South Pacific. You have to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You have to be carefully taught. And that's what we have to do in this country to keep this racism alive. If we want racism to stop, we have to stop teaching racism. In our homes, in our churches, people, Jesus did not look like the little Pillsbury Doughboy. I've been described as a teacher. I'm not a teacher. Teachers dispense facts and figures so that they can get their kids ready for the end of school testing. I've been called a trainer. You train dogs and horses and members of the military. I don't train people. I'm an educator. The word educator, I don't want to be interrupted anymore. People, the word educator comes from the root duck deuce, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. Now,
and I was very fortunate to be raised by a mother who was a teacher. My father was a teacher as well, and I would like to say an educator
yes.
in the way
Absolutely.
you described
Yes.
What it means to be an educator. Because as I've said many times, from the moment when I became aware of the fact that black people were treated as inferior, I can remember hearing my mother's voice say, "This is not the way things are supposed to be. This is not the way the world is supposed to be organized. And one day they will be different." So as a result, I learned how to imagine a different world early on. When I was...
You only live once, so you better get up. Don't never give up, and be strong.